Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. God, that's a mouthful.
Very big mouthful.
I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and with me is Mark Johnson.
Gropings and solicitations, everybody.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
Well, let's see how I do. I know I do this week. I know I was exceptionally silly last week. I don't know where that came from. And
yeah, you were, weren't you?
Judging by my opening, I might be on another roll there. So we'll have to see how this goes. But I'll try to behave. Try being the operative word here.
No, both of you and Monkey, were really naughty last week on the show. Really naughty. I didn't know where to put my face. If I'd had a live audience in front of me, I would have been under the desk hiding.
I think it was that coming full moon, the snow moon eclipse, and the comet all in the sky at the same time. Maybe that had something to do with it, or maybe it was the fact that we were just being silly.
I think you're just being silly.
That's probably it.
To tell you the truth, I really don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, with us tonight, we have our guest, Ashley Mortimer. Hello, Ashley.
Good evening, all. Hello.
Hi, Ashley. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, I'm fair to magnificent and probably capable of being silly with you if you want me to be.
Well,
no, not the two.
We'll get us all going tonight.
Oh, he's got Monkey.
Yeah, a monkey called Charlie, and Charlie the monkey whispers things in my ears and tells me to say things sometimes, and I regret them later. So.
I know it's all those monkeys. It is always the monkeys that do it.
I had that problem for a while too, but they gave me medication for that. Although sometimes there's side effects, but nothing that I can't handle. Whoa!
I hope they're pleasant.
Yeah, pleasant. All right. Anyway, so tonight we're going to be talking with you, Ashley, about Doreen Valiente.
Yes, Doreen Valiente, indeed, the so-called mother of modern witchcraft.
That's right. Yeah, okay, and a very remarkable lady.
And being the ignorant, ugly American, I have to ask for clarification on that because I'm really not familiar with this person.
Okay, well, during the middle of last century, there was a renewed interest in modern-day interpretations of ancient pagan religions and beliefs. Witchcraft was a word that got bandied around. The word Wicca was invented, and Doreen Valiente was one of the forerunners, an English lady who was involved with a guy called Gerald Gardner, and they were really the forerunners of popularizing or publicizing the fact that modern-day paganism even existed. Because right up until 1952, of course, it was illegal under the 1735 Witchcraft Act. And after that, Gerald Gardner published a number of books. Doreen actually helped him write one of them. I believe she wrote quite a bit more of that book than other people might have imagined. And as a result of that, the popularity of modern-day witchcraft and paganism spread out to America eventually through the 1960s. Doreen always thought it caught a current. There was a kind of experimental idea of people experimenting with new ideas of spirituality, freedom, religion, music, and all sorts of other things. And Wicca and modern-day witchcraft were one of those things that people picked up and has lasted. Paganism in the UK is the 7th biggest faith group in the UK.
That's interesting. And, paganism has really taken off in modern times. There's a lot of renewed interest by a lot of different people in this day and age. Now, with witchcraft, one thing that I've never really fully understood is what's the difference between that and, like, some of the other pagan religions that are, the Druids and all that come from the UK?
Well, to understand that, you have to kind of get a flavour for what paganism is, and that's not an easy thing to define. Paganism, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is a term that describes faiths and religions and belief systems outside of the mainstream, which tells us what it isn't, not so much what it is. Modern-day paganism is a really broad umbrella term for a lot of different faiths, ideas, spiritualities, religions, all of which have not very they have things in common with each other, common threads, which doesn't mean that every pagan religion has the same, but common threads like the ideas of pantheism, the idea that the divine is immanent in nature, that all of nature has got an element of the divine in it. Animism, which is the idea that all things have a spiritual connection to each other, or at least have a soul or a spirit. And then you've got polytheism, which is the idea that there are multiple gods, or at least multiple facets to the divine as well. So these are all kind of common threads of what pagan ideas and pagan beliefs are. Witchcraft, there are a number of. I mean, it's a word that's loaded and heavy with connotations, some of which in the past have been not very positive. But for those who describe themselves as practitioners of modern pagan witchcraft, it's a religion that takes all of those views on board, and it celebrates the divine in nature and our role in the natural cycle of things as human beings and as other animals and plants and other living creatures in the universe. And modern day witchcraft, Wicca particularly tends to lean to the idea that the divine manifests itself as a balance between a masculine and a feminine divine principle, a god and a goddess, if you like. So I don't know if that's helpful to you to understand that, but yeah, we'll take up the whole 2 hours of the program if we carry on with this question.
Well, I always understood paganism more to be in line with, I mean, from the Christianity standpoint, they could look at any non-Christian, non-major religion as pagan. But, it seems like the focus on modern paganism tends to be towards more of what I refer to as the nature religions. Things dealing with natural energies, the earth mother, and of course spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are ideas that are very ancient amongst most of our civilizations. Over in your neck of the woods, across the Atlantic, on what your indigenous peoples, some of whom referred to as Turtle Island, certainly by dint of their similarities in beliefs and ideas about how the universe works and what our place in it is, then you would have to say that that paganism, in its modern interpretation, is very akin to indigenous Native American practices.
Irene?
So yes, it is a nature-based religion without a doubt. There's no question of that. It's a celebration of our part in the natural cycle, and the part that others play in it, and our connection to them and to it.
So, do you understand now, Mark?
Yes, I get the gist of it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, Ashley, Doreen, she was born in 1922 in Collier's Wood, Mitcham, wasn't she?
She was indeed, yes. She was born. We have in the collection one or two bits of papers of Doreen where she'd started to write what would have been an autobiography. One manuscript of which is entitled "Have Broomstick Will Travel," and she describes her birth as being an interesting evening where the doctor had to be summoned suddenly and appeared in full evening dress and Masonic regalia.
Yeah.
In fact, she started the manuscript. The manuscript starts with, "It was a dark and stormy night," or if it wasn't, it should have been.
That's really good.
I like a sense of humor.
Yeah, I like a sense of humour as well.
Yeah, absolutely. She's very down-to-earth sort of person. We were talking before the show about Doreen's personable nature, and I think, even her more serious books, all of her books are serious on the subject of witchcraft, and she was vastly knowledgeable, but one of those people whose ability to put over their knowledge, in a way that's friendly and readable and personable, as well as being authentic and genuine and a strong and deep knowledge. She had that way of making you feel like when you read her books that she's writing just for you. I've heard a lot of people say that. So yeah, she's got that style, but those who knew her well, including some of my colleagues at the Doreen Valiente Foundation, they all say the same thing, that she was extremely funny. She was extremely witty and dry humoured in conversation. She was great fun to be with. So
someone that was easy to get on with.
Absolutely. Doreen got on with everybody. She didn't see the point in not getting on with people.
Yeah. Like I said, she come from Collier's Wood, Mitcham, just down the road from where my husband was born. So there's the first connection. That's the first connection.
You see, you're doing what a lot of people do. She comes over as extremely likable from the first encounter with Doreen, even via the internet or however else you hear about her name. And people always seem to do that. They always seem to think, oh, well, I used to do that, or I know somebody who was there, or whatever. And Irene, you've just done exactly the same thing. I think she had that way when she was alive as well of making people feel that they were allied to her in some way, that there was some connection there. And I think that's, I don't think she ever nurtured that particularly, and she certainly didn't play on it. But I think that's just something that she was one of those people who had that kind of personality. And I think that really lends itself to somebody trying to get over the ideas of a subject that's potentially a bit controversial.
It sounds like that 6 degrees of separation from 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon.
Who's he?
And you missed it. He got it. You missed that.
If he's rude, you can tell me later.
No. The whole idea is that you can, between people you're separated from Kevin Bacon by 6 people. Going down the line, and eventually that 6th person will know him, or like a famous person is what it's supposed to be. So everybody knows somebody who, by the time you've done that 5 times, you've got to just about any other individual in the world. Right.
That's right. And Kevin Bacon, as a film actor, just happened to be an example. That's true. Doreen's very close. Doreen must be the same with anybody else, But of course, with this status that she has as being one of the founders of a modern day version of witchcraft called Wicca, and she didn't really use that word Wicca very often, although that's what they refer to. Gerald Gardner probably introduced the word to the language, although he claims it has an older Anglo-Saxon root, and Doreen claimed the same thing. But because of that, there are those of us who are practitioners, and those of us who are initiates of the craft of the wise of the Wicca, who are close to Doreen in a kind of, how can I describe it, in a sort of spiritual family way. And if you run across initiates, you find that there's a very close bond between those of us within the craft. We all kind of, even globally, sort of know each other. And Doreen's really the grandmother of that. But what Doreen really did was expand that just from just that sort of spiritual family outward to anybody and everybody. She believed very firmly that anybody who wanted to worship the spirit of the divine in nature was perfectly entitled to do so in whatever way they saw fit. And she was very willing to share her knowledge in her books and in her lectures and the other things she did to help people to make the connection with their own spirit in order to connect with the divine and with everybody else's.
Okay, yeah.
No.
She's sorry, Mark. Did you want to say something?
Go ahead. You first.
Well, I was going to say she took an interest at a very, very early age in witchcraft, didn't she?
She did. She talks.
13, was it?
Yeah. Well, there was 1 or 2 incidents in her childhood which led her to believe that there was something going on. She described it herself. I think there's a BBC radio interview where there's some footage of her saying one night she saw the moonlight and she saw the. Is that what you were about to refer to? Yeah,
that's what I wanted. I wanted to know when she looked up at the moon, what did she see?
She says she saw the veil become thin and part between the physical world of form, and she saw behind it the world of forces, the invisible world of forces. When she says she saw, I think she means perhaps perceived. And she said to her it was utterly beautiful and so natural. And I mean, that's an experience that billions of human beings have. Their ability to articulate it or to make sense of it or to want to do something about it is different. But
I had a question regarding that, and I assume from what your comments are, Ashley, that you yourself are a practitioner.
Yeah, I was just saying exactly that. I'm an initiate of the Wicca. I'm related, if you like, in a spiritual and initiatory way to Doreen by, let me think, from my initiators, probably 4 or 5 degrees, 4 or 5 different what do you call it, hops to where Doreen and Gerald Gardner are. Those of us who are initiates are able to trace our initiatory lineage back to Gerald, and Gerald, of course, was the one who initiated Doreen into the craft in 1952. Now, 53, sorry.
I have 2 questions. We'll go with the first one here. You had previously mentioned that there was a law against paganism from 1753, I believe?
The 1735 Witchcraft Act, which, I mean, Britain had a lot of archaic laws that were hardly in use, but the Witchcraft Act was last used to prosecute a medium named Helen Duncan just after the Second World War. And Helen Duncan actually went to prison. She spent 9 months in prison under the Act. So when it was repealed in 1951, that was kind of a big deal to people like Gerald Gardner, who were trying to. Gerald was trying to open a museum of witchcraft, and he was trying to publicize and promote the idea that there was a witchcraft and a modern pagan religious cult that it was possible to contact and join. But of course, he had to be very careful, not just legally but socially. So, of course, the repeal of the Witchcraft Act that enabled him to publish books. He'd published books in novel form. He'd written fictional works that had included genuine witchcraft practices. But now he was able to write non-fiction, and it was through the publicity of the museum and an article in a magazine, which was called Illustrated Magazine, written by a man called Alan Andrews, that Doreen read, that made her come alive to the idea that the things she was interested in were actually being practiced by other people. And she wrote to Gerald, and as a result of that, they met each other, contacted each other, and he initiated her into the craft a year later.
Now, I would just...
That was originally the Isle of Man Museum, wasn't it?
It was.
But I mean, closed.
It did indeed. It closed after Gerald died. He bequeathed it to another couple who ran it for a further 9 years. But that was kind of Gerald's. I wouldn't say it was his life work. I think his life work was to see to it that the craft that he'd found in the New Forest in the 1930s, and the coven into which he'd been initiated, I think he viewed it as being part of Britain's spiritual heritage. And I think he thought that if he was interested, others would be as well. And he didn't want to see it die out. And he kind of went on through his retirement. You know, I mean, he was in his 50s then, and he went on a sort of one-man mission to make sure that the crafts of the wise survived and found its way to those who were interested and who were called to it, were able to find it. And in that respect, I think he succeeded. But obviously, he had this idea that a museum would be a really great. I'm not going to say cover, because that makes it sound really, Machiavellian and clandestine. He had a museum of witchcraft, and it was. He didn't openly say, "Oh, if you want to be a witch, then come and see me." But that was kind of the gist of it.
Yeah.
The with the practice being outlawed for a couple hundred years, then I would assume that there were plenty of pagans and witches that just kind of went underground at that point for fear of persecution. But my question is, when the modern version came about, was it passed on by people who had carried on the tradition, or did it have the first gentleman you mentioned? Did it have to be relearned, so to speak? Well,
now that's a source of great debate. Now, Gerald Gardner was a lot of people. I think Gerald's a bit misunderstood, and I think that if you understand that what he wanted to do was spread the word, then you kind of can forgive him some of his other transgressions, one of which was an insistence that the craft of the wise had been handed down right the way through from pre-Christian times, Old Stone Age upwards. I don't think he ever tried to suggest that people were doing the same things as they were, back when we were living in caves and what have you. However, the idea of a continued tradition, the expert historians say that although there is no evidence to suggest that, and certainly a study of Gerald's description of how the craft is practiced lends as much to the Victorian occult revival and Masonic practices and various other spiritual medieval grimoires and so on, and a great deal presumably to do with Gerald's imagination too, than any kind of recognisable handed-down tradition. There are plenty of people who have claimed that they are descended either genetically or through initiation through families. My experiences and knowledge and the people I know, particularly in my line of the craft, which springs from Scotland actually, from a guy called Charles Clark, who was a friend of Gerald's while he was running the museum on the Isle of Man, suggests that there is a great deal in the rural folklore of every bit of Britain that indicates that there may very well be hereditary witch families, but nobody's actually been able to prove a connection, and I think it's quite dubious that they would. Although in Gerald's case, and Doreen as well, she's perhaps a little more pragmatic about things than Gerald. I think Gerald felt that if he gave way a bit on any admission of non-authenticity, then it would kind of ruin everything. Doreen's point was much more pragmatic, and she basically said, look, does it really matter whether it's been handed on, whether we can prove it or not? The fact is it works. The practice of modern day witchcraft as a mechanism to to guide yourself morally and spiritually in a religious sense, and also to be able to effect changes in the world of form through the use of energies and forces, magic, if you like, just works. And if it works and it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that was kind of Doreen's approach.
What would you say are the differences, or are there any differences when you compare modern Wicca to other types of shamanism stemming from different, I hate saying more primitive cultures, but, more earth-based cultures stemming from, Tibet down to the South America to Australian Aborigines, even to North American Native Americans?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very strong commonality of practice, or at least in the principles in which things work, and those who are initiated into the craft are taught how that happens, the ways in which witches raise energy and then put it to use to cause effects, do have great similarities to the way that other civilizations and cultures practice their own form of, let's call it magic for the sake of arguing. It's a good word, even though I'm aware that it has other connotations. Yeah, there's a great deal of similarity, and in terms of the religious aspects to the practice of modern day witchcraft, it does bear a massive resemblance to many of those that you mentioned. And my particular field of interest is Native American practices, or certainly the Northern Plains Indians, the Lakotas, Dakotas, and so on. And there's a great number of similarities in the way in which the divine is approached, and the way in which the shaman or the practitioner prepares themselves and uses the similar techniques. You can see quite easily that the techniques obviously are almost the same thing, certainly in principle. So yeah, I mean, there is a great similarity. Obviously, culturally, it's kind of different, but it's always interested me, the thought that if these practices work, do they have, we were talking about degrees of separation, do they all have a common root?
Well, and it also makes me wonder where it came from. I mean, if this type of shamanistic or paganistic practices dealing with spirit, earth energies, seems to be as old as mankind. And yet so many, especially now in Western society, poo-poos the idea, and so much of it seems to be forgotten amongst most people. But yet it's been a part of humanity since it seems like our very beginning.
Well, it has from our very beginning. I mean, it's always been you have to go right back to that to get some kind of handle on the subject. I mean, my personal thoughts on the matter over many years of thinking about it and studying it, we've got primitive civilizations just about discovering fire, living in caves, wandering around nomadically, trying to find food where they can, trying not to die on a daily basis. I mean, you've only got to sprain your ankle down a little hole in the earth, and you're probably as good as dead, when you're running around in, 13,000 BC. But these people found time to start creative practices like drawing on cave walls. Why? I don't know why. Why did they do that? The modern interpretation of that is that by depicting, say, for example, an animal that they would then hunt, by depicting that animal, they made some kind of a non-physical connection with it, either to revere it and thank it for its sacrifice, or just to make the hunt, work. But, we're talking about early civilization where humans are experimenting with all sorts of techniques and tools. I mean, we're still only making flint tools and things like that. Why did they do these elaborate drawings on the cave walls? Was it ritualistic? And my conclusion can only be that if they did that and then hunting was better, or they survived more strongly, then Darwin just says, look, if you do something and you evolve to continue to do it and it works, then you'll keep doing it. So my theory is that however it was discovered, it worked, and because it worked, people continue to do it, and then things become traditions, and traditions then evolve and develop and continue, and people do things just because they always did them. We even in our modern culture, we still do that. We have our daily routines and rituals where we do things without any real understanding of why. Superstition as well is another, lays a lot to that sort of thing. If you look at practices that people do you can usually find some ancient root to why we throw salt over our shoulders for good luck and so on and so forth. So I think if you go right back, you've got to see that our ancestors were taking enough trouble when they perhaps could have been avoiding dying more obviously, and they were depicting goddess statues and revering and worshipping them, drawing on cave walls and all those other practices that from which all modern religion springs, to be honest. This idea that there is a divine force. And of course, if you just follow that forward a few centuries, then or a few millennia, in fact, you get to the bit where the ancient civilizations that revered a mother goddess, a kind of fertility goddess, if you like, it makes natural sense that observing the natural world, all fertility appears to spring from the female. So then you get to, I don't know, about perhaps, say, 10,000 BC, something like that, where agriculture begins. Some bright spark realized that the male has a role to play in the fertility cycle for all animals and plants, and started to nurture that and husband that. And that's when you start to see the appearance of a male god for the first time, to partner the female goddess. So that sort of crude study of human religious development kind of follows the same pattern as the study of humans mucking about with non-physical things in order to cause physical effects. Now, that's just my theory, and I know I've explained it in fairly coarse language, but essentially that's the basis of modern-day religion.
But there's a difference, and this is what really fascinates me. There's a difference between somebody painting on a cave wall trying to affect like a hunt, putting out that intent. And this is something Irene and I have talked about a lot, about the power of intent and will of using our own energies. But to advance to where Wiccan is today with the much more intense manipulation of energies, dealing with spirits, so to speak, or other types of entities. You know, it goes a long way from, again, the beginnings of paintings on cave walls, and it's just really curious to me and how all of this gets discovered as we develop.
Well, it does. I mean, let me think. How can I explain that? I suppose it follows logically that if you're going to take an animistic view of the natural world, that everything's got some non-physical aspect to its nature, to its reality, then there must be things out there that have no physical aspect at all and are purely spiritual. So that's where you get this notion of ghosts, spirits, and the like, including the divine and the deities and the gods and the angels, or whatever you want to call these other non-physical entities. So, I mean, I think there's a logic to that, in itself. But this act, this ritualistic act, it works, and modern practices work. I've seen pretty startling things in my time, and I'm sure my colleagues in the craft as well would say the same thing. Doreen herself says so on a number of occasions, that you just can't ignore. And it's individual experiences, and for me, I think it is individuals, and I think that's really where all innovation in humanity comes from. I should imagine that at some point, Mr. Rugg the caveman said to his mates in the other cave, "Hey, that big orangey thing that pops up once occasionally when there's the fire in the sky and we can all get warm around it. Have you ever thought that we could kind of carry a log from my cave to yours and kind of keep it going until the next one?" People just sort of experiment with things, and it must be individuals, and word sort of spreads, and you end up with this kind of this giant sort of pot of the custard of knowledge, I suppose, that gets stirred by individuals who think, oh yeah, let's just try something different. And I think Darwin was on the ball. That's kind of how nature itself deals with his theory of evolution and how that works. And I think the same thing happens culturally and in practice as well, and not just in magical and religious practices, but in the way that humans live their whole lives. It must be an individual that started it, and another one looked at him and went, "Why is he running around with hey, that's a good idea. Let's wrap some fur around us and we'll stay warmer." And it can only be the success of the practices and the observation of other people doing it that spreads these things. So I don't see it as too far a step. But of course, we're now in a world of elaborate ways of engendering the same things. But my learnings in the craft have always been get it back to basics as soon as possible. Never mind all of that accoutrements and all of that. It all works. It's all good. Ritual is a good thing. But, there are ways to accomplish things that are much simpler than that.
Well, there's also the other aspect of our humanity, and that is that there are some people that are more in tune psychically than others. and they're the ones who've been able to perceive certain things, or people who over time through working with these energies start to develop more and more sensitivities to these other worlds, like you mentioned, Doreen, being able to see that veil between up by the moon and see the veil between our physical world and the non-physical world. So, see, one of the things that I've always been interested in is the idea that the whole linear evolution of man, I don't really exactly believe that per se, because I think there's so much evidence for more highly advanced civilizations. And I'm not talking the ancient alien aspect. I'm talking about there seems to be, we as humans were probably much more evolved in the past, in civilizations back before whatever disasters happened, the Great Flood, or what all the civilizations around the world seem to have this disaster myth. And I think that we had certain abilities at those times, and much more, we were much more in tune. And then after that, we kind of had a dumbing down, a setting back. And then we're relearning all this.
Something happened, didn't it? Because, I mean, with all the science, technology, architecture, and all the other accoutrements of modern knowledge and science and learning, we're looking at ancient civilizations and looking at things like pyramids and walls and Stonehenge and thinking, how the hell did they do that?
Exactly.
And how did they make it line up with the stars like that every year without a proper compass or a map or an atomic clock? And we don't actually know how it was achieved, which to me, like you, that suggests that there was some outside interference in the knowledge at some stage. Now, by outside, I mean, you might write it off to the divine. You might have the aliens coming down and telling us their secrets and X-Files like disappearing off again and all the rest of it. But certainly there's something funny about our ancient civilizations and their ability to do things on a scale that was that they didn't ought to have been able to do according to modern science, given how little how primitive they were in other ways. So I agree with you. I think there's a mystery there, but I think that the craft way of looking at it is that the ability to connect with the divine and connect with a whole cosmos and world and universe of forces and intelligences and ideas and energies beyond the obvious physical constraints of 3 dimensions of space and 1 linear dimension of time. I think that's latent in all humans. That's what I've been taught and what I come to understand, that it's latent in us and that you can be taught these things. So I don't see why somebody shouldn't have been taught something quite advanced by let's call it a discarnate non-physical entity back in the past. And then it naturally filters out when somebody sees, let's go back to my example of Mr. Ugg the caveman, who's suddenly got fire and none of the others have. They all want a piece of that too. So it spreads out. But how he got fire, was it the divine gift of the gods? Do we owe much to Greek the Greek myths and the idea of how man developed the ability to make fire, or was it just an accident one day that someone discovered and someone else copied? It's difficult to know, but there's definitely something went on in our human history that changed us. And you're right, our evolution develops in leaps and starts. It's not a smooth linear progression, is it?
No. And the other question, I think you just may have answered it, would be anybody who's looking into Wicca or in this type of paganism and working with these types of energies, can just anybody learn it and do it, or does it take someone who has special gifts and abilities to really master it?
Well, I hope I haven't answered a question. I was hoping to ask one, and really it was more rhetorical. But I'm not here to provide answers. But in respect of that particular subject, Doreen actually had a very good thing that she told my colleague John one night. She said, "Do you know, John, there's 3 kinds of witches?" And he said, "Oh, really? Is that right?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "There's those people who have probably been a witch in a past life, if you believe in reincarnation, and they've got it. They have that gift. They have that ability, and it's developed within them, and they have it at birth, and they're kind of born to the craft. And if they find their way to the craft and become initiated into it, it's like coming home for them." And she said, and then there's those who really work at it, who really want it. They really want to be able to develop these abilities and powers. And she said sometimes they make better witches, because they try harder. And they've got that kind of thirst and that hunger for something that they think they haven't got. And then they're kind of delighted and surprised as it comes out in them. So really, she answered that question. But like your listeners, you're probably thinking the same thing as John thought that night when he related the story to me. And he said, hang on a minute, Doreen. He said, didn't you say there were 3 kinds of witches? And she said, yes. And he said, well, what's the 3rd kind? And she said, oh, they're the ones who have got all the best crushed velvet and all the nice jewellery.
Oh, well, I've always believed that it's in all of us, literally in all of us. But it's in a lot of people, it is very late. It's they don't know they've got it. They
I mean, I think anybody can play the piano. Anybody can learn to play the piano. I learned to play
it's guidance.
I learned to play the guitar. I was just bloody minded about it. I'm not very good. I'm all right, but there are other people who you hand a musical instrument to a child and they just play it, and it's in their blood. But it doesn't mean that the rest of us haven't got the ability. And the same is true of the psychic abilities, magic, witchcraft, and the other arts. Let's call it the art. Just with some people,
they need guidance in it. That's all. But it's naturally in them.
Well, that's true. I think it's naturally in all of us. But some people, it's more pronounced, in its own natural way. And they're not always as easy to work with. I'm not. I was very interested in these subjects when I was a teenager, and and I used to think of myself as about as psychic as a brick, and it was a matter of overcoming some belief there a little bit. And now, some people come up to me and they sort of say, "Oh, there's something funny about you, isn't there?" And I think, yeah, there is, and I know there is, and know there is, and we'll see where that goes, kind of thing. But I've never really thought of it as a gift like that. It's just there are some people who are kind of wired differently, and they think differently, and they behave differently, and they perceive differently. And
that's right.
I don't think it's not something that you can't teach. If you're asking how do you become a witch, then the answer is the gods guide you to it. There's a strange quirk of circumstance, and all of us happen to find our way to it. Those of us who have found our way to the initiated craft anyway, it just sort of seems to happen to us. Kind of walk around our lives going, oh, a thing's happened, and this has come about because of that. In my case, I happened to be on the bus with somebody who I'd known for a number of years, who I didn't know was a witch. And it was through the foundation, in fact, that she sort of said, "Oh, what are you doing on a bus late at night?" And my answer was, "I've just come back from Spain. You wouldn't believe what I've been doing. I've been going through the collection of a lady called Doreen Valiente." And she said, "Oh, I know who Doreen Valiente is." I said, "Do you? How do you know that then?" She said, "Oh, I'm a witch, I said, "I didn't know that." And this particular lady, this particular friend of mine, I asked her several months later if she would help me on my path, and she initiated me into the craft about a year and a half later. Yeah. So for me, it came about on buses. Now I understand in my particular line of the craft, there's a bit of a history of weird coincidental meetings on the back of a bus with people meeting each other and so on. So, I think the universe guides you to it is really the answer. Although, obviously, in the modern world, and thanks to people like Doreen, there are a large number of books and internet websites where you can pretty well prove anything to yourself, I think. Yes, it's a question of needing a little bit of guidance through that kind of murky world. And we have organisations across the world, like the Pagan Federation. There's the Children of Artemis. There's a number of national and international organisations that I would say, are the best place to start. For those who are interested, and the internet is a good source of information as long as you don't believe any of it and treat everything with great skepticism. And I'm pretty sure the same's true of those who are interested in the paranormal world and interested in becoming paranormal investigators. It's a question of making contact with the right people and and it kind of clicking into place.
That's true. But you were saying earlier on that practically everybody in the United Kingdom is related at some point or other to witchcraft in some way. Well, I've got a claim to fame as well. I'm from the Mackenzie clan, and one of the clansmen was he was stoned on a mountain as a witch. And also I'm related to the Bronze Seer. So,
Wow.
Which is pretty good.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and how does that affect your daily life?
Well, I have certain gifts. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, I knew there was something. I know that sounded like a flippant question on my part, and I wondered how you'd answer it, but then that's how it goes. Yeah, you've got a certain something, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a certain something. Mark knows what it is, but I don't go around talking about it very much.
No. Doreen used to be. She was very capable of being evasive if she needed to be.
Yeah.
She used to sort of say, "Oh yes, I felt a need to do a little something in a usual way, you know," and she'd leave it at that. And I mean, if you knew what she was talking about, you'd know what she meant. But
would you say I was evasive, Mark?
You evasive? No.
No, would you?
Say you being evasive? As in not answering questions? Being quiet and private? Oh, yes.
Well, there's a kind of art, isn't there, to that? And when you meet people who are involved in things like witchcraft, where there's a secrecy, and I don't mean that in a sinister way, but you have different religions in the world. You have what they call the revealed religions, which is sort of a religion like Christianity, where it's, here's our book, this is what we believe, have a look, see if you agree. And then you have what you call the mystery traditions. And modern day witchcraft is undoubtedly a mystery tradition, which means that the knowledge and the experience is revealed to you along the way, along your own journey and your own path. But having trod that path for a while, you find that people start to be a certain way. And, you know, my initiator, she's particularly good at dodging questions with questions. And I've got a couple of people I've trained as well, or I'm training, and they're developing the same traits. I've been watching one person particularly interestingly. She's very, very good at asking awkward questions. And, you know, if she's listening to this, she'll know who she is, and she'll now know my secret. But my secret is the reason I like her so much is because she asks the awkward questions that I then have to fumble to answer. But then
I'm like it, actually, Ashley, I'm like it because as far as I'm concerned, it's nobody else's business, you know?
Well, absolutely true. Absolutely right. I think I remember, yeah, that's right. I can't think of the quote now, but there is a very good quote on the subject that, you know, my one of my other friends, Sarah, she's like that. She read a lot of books when she started on her path into the craft. She took some advice from one of Gerald Gardner's high priestesses and a very good friend of Doreen, a lady named Patricia Crowther, who lives in Sheffield, an elder of the craft without a doubt. And Patricia said, "Oh, you must read, dear. Read lots of books. Read everything." And I used to sort of sit with Sarah saying, "Well, so you finished that book. What was it like?" And she'd look at me with this sort of blank look, and I'd go, "Well, go on." And she'd go, "Well, read it if you want to know." And she had that. I realised after a while she had this idea that knowledge was hers. It wasn't really anyone else's business. What was I doing prodding into her knowledge?
You know. Yeah, you see, with me it's different. I don't read anything like that. I honestly don't. The only time I read anything is if I've got a guest coming on the show, but I won't read books because I don't need to. I know in my head the answers to everything I want to know. I just I just put the answer out there, you know, or tell myself, right, I want to know this question, and then I get the answer. So I leave it at that.
Well, you have...
It's funny how that works.
Yeah,
I spent quite a few years with an Indian, let's call it, he would hate me saying Native American, but, you know, Indian would be the right word. And he taught me quite a lot about some of the practices that he knew about. And he was exactly the same. He said, if you want to know the answer, just ask. Upstairs will tell you. They'll find a way of telling you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't help myself. I drop into his accent. But he'd say, "Oh, just look up. They'll show you. They'll show you." Yeah. And he's right. Get out in nature and see what nature says. And we had all kinds of. We used to laugh a lot about things. I didn't laugh at one of his jokes, and he said, "You want to be careful. They'll punish you from upstairs if you don't laugh at my jokes." And as he said it, a twig dropped off a tree onto my shoulder, and he went, "There, you know, that's the first warning." And over the course of several weeks, every time I didn't laugh at his jokes, something would happen. Like it became a branch, and then one day a tree fell down in front of the car as we were going along.
Oh, no.
And we all leapt out the car, kind of, "Is everybody all right?" And he didn't say, "Are you all right?" His first words out of his mouth were, "I told you to laugh at my jokes." And then he's probably somewhere in the world now, telling the story now. I would love to think of him somewhere. I haven't seen him for a few years. He's probably telling that story now and saying, "Oh, I had a friend in England. His name's Ashley, and he didn't laugh at my jokes, and they dropped a twig on him, and he still didn't laugh, so they dropped a branch, and eventually they had to drop a whole tree on him before he started laughing properly."
What were you going to say, Mark? So,
sorry, I'm hogging the conversation. Well, I mean, let them, and to be honest, our Christian friends have similar things in the Bible. You know, let him who hath understanding. If you have ears to hear, then listen. And nature out there has got messages for you if you know how to look.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to comment on the earlier aspect of, being evasive. I mean, let's face it, some teachers, asking a direct question and getting a direct answer doesn't stimulate thought,
Nope.
So sometimes answering a question with a question, being evasive, allows that person to do more deeper thinking in order to come to their own conclusions.
Well, I was asked a tremendous question by my trainee. She's an amazing girl. Turned up in my life last year, and she really sparked a few things off. But one of the early questions, as she was kind of contemplating whether she wanted to ask about stepping forward onto the path towards the craft, she said, "How much of it is knowledge, and how much of it is the other thing?" And I said, "What do you mean the other thing?" And she said, thinkiness. And I said, thinkiness, what a great word to describe it. That ability to just what you said, Mark, that kind of questioning, figuring it out, working it out for yourself, stimulated thought, not just reading from a textbook, do this and this will happen, but, start thinking about it, work it out for yourself. And thinkiness has become a little thing that we've been using in our training, the way we've been going along, because I think it's a brilliant way to describe it. If you have an education system of any sort that knocks the thinkiness out of people and makes it all about knowingness, it ruins it. And especially when you're dealing with subtle subjects which defy language sometimes. I've had experiences which I could barely describe if I wanted to, and to some extent that does comprise some of the secrets of the craft. Is the knowledge of experience until you've been in a magic circle with whirling witches who are initiating you into the craft. I can't tell you what that feels like until you've experienced it. So it remains a secret. Now, I mean, I call it a secret, and everyone's, tell us the secrets. But you can't describe your experiences unless you experience them yourself. And it's something that I think as a human being, it strikes me that, if I just push chemicals into myself and generate money for someone or for the whole of my life, then what was the point? I'd like to know stuff. I want to know what's going on, and I've got a sort of thirst for that and a kind of passion to inquire into it, particularly the poking around in the darker corners of life. And I'm pretty bored. Even as a teenager, I was pretty bored with modern day culture and modern day society, and the things and the aspirations and expectations that you were supposed to have. And I thought, no, there's much more interesting things out there. There's much more amazing stuff to explore. And why is the sky that color? And how does it look like that? And what's up there beyond that? And why do the trees do this? And how is it that when I'm in the woods, I feel this way, and yet when I'm in a concrete building, I don't have that same feeling? Why? It's all these inquiring questions, and it's a school of applied thinkiness, I think. And my student, she'll laugh when she hears that.
I love the word. That's going to be my word for the week. But Ashley, sometimes when Mark asks me a question, I give him an answer, which he has the thinkiness, don't you, Mark? Huh?
What exactly do you mean by that?
Sometimes when when
mm-hmm.
when the questions, the answers that come back, you have to sit there and think about it.
Well,
and then you get what's the word?
An epiphany.
A piff.
Yes.
A piff.
Yes.
Right? Now, one of my elders in the craft, one of my teachers, she calls it a piff. She rang me up a few months ago and she said, "I've had a piff." And I said, "I'm sorry, you've had a what?" "A piff." It's like an epiphany, only not quite so big. It's only a small thing. Thought you'd enjoy it. She'll pass that on.
He gets them quite often from me. You see, I'll say something and they turn around and say, "Well, I know." And they think about it and they think, "Do you know something? That means this, and that." And I think, well, he's got it.
But sometimes it's not coming directly from you.
That's my fault, is it?
and usually when those happen, the answer or the statement that I get is so brief and yet so powerful that I will literally think about it for days and weeks.
I get that. I mean, it's that. I think somebody once said that the art of being a good teacher isn't to just pass on your knowledge from your brain into your student's brain, but it's that idea of leading your student to the threshold of their own wisdom and getting people onto a path where they can, manage for themselves. And that's without giving too much of the secrets of modern day witchcraft away. That's really the key to it is encouraging people to to develop their own powers themselves and to empower themselves. You know, there's not. I think that's one of the things.
I never looked on Mark as a student before.
Well, I've used that word. I hate that word. My student often calls me teacher, and she pokes fun at me by saying it. And I don't like that, because we're learning together. I've learned as much from her as she's learned from me, and that's part of the organic process, you know. And we have these long sessions of applied thinkiness where we come up with these theories about how the world works, and we both go away and think about them, and then have a million things to say next time we see each other, because we've thought of 100 other things that have sprung out from there. And to me, that's kind of the way that you develop as a human being, and it's about your own spiritual development. And to me, that's what a religion should be. And you know, I know that there are others who find religion and treat it in a different way, but for me, that's what my religion always was as a child. And I got kind of disappointed in the mainstream religions that didn't suit me being able to do that. I'm not saying they're wrong and I'm right by a long, long chalk, but it was just that style in which you experienced your own spirituality. So when I found the craft and discovered that it was empowering to me, and it was kind of, believe what you like, get on with it, you know, just think about it and make sense of it and quest for that knowledge. That was a big epiphany for me, to realize that that's probably, if there is a divine being, a great spirit, a Gitchimanitu, whatever you want to call it, it probably just wants you to kind of develop your own spirituality to a stage where you've applied some thinkiness so that you know a bit more and you've had some more experiences. It doesn't just want to drum into you, you know, cowering on all fours at how magnificent it is. I think it probably thinks that would be quite boring. Now, do you know something? I think Doreen Valiente would love that word, thinkiness. I would think so, yeah. I suspect so.
I do.
I don't know whether I should tell this story. I probably...
Go on then.
Maybe I should. I will do. So this particular person, who's a very significant person to me, because she was my first trainee on the way to the craft. When I met her, I was giving a talk and I was exhibiting some of Doreen's artifacts. And amongst the artifacts is a bracelet that Gerald Gardner made for Doreen, and it's got some magical runes inscribed on it. And it's obviously an important piece of ritual, and it has quite a great significance. And I was just talking to somebody in the room after the talk, and the artifacts were there on the table. And I looked round, and this girl she put the bracelet on. And she looked, and she saw the look of horror on my face, and immediately took it off. And went, "Oh, I'm sorry. And I looked at her, and I thought, I actually said at the time, I said, "You're the first person who's ever picked that up and put it on. I wonder why that is." And I never really thought anything of it after that, but she did. And you know, within a month or so, she'd become quite close to me, and we'd started on this training path. But I do wonder whether that she's the one who came up with the word thinkiness, by the way. But she had an instant connection with Doreen, and of course, me being me, I'd forgotten about that incident until many weeks later. But she said, "Do you remember giving that talk? And do you remember it was me? I was the one who put that bracelet on?" And I said, "No." "Oh yeah, wait a minute, you were." So maybe there was something in that too. But and I think maybe she and Doreen would have got on.
Yeah. I like this girl.
That could have been an indication that maybe the bracelet called out to her. She was meant to pick it up.
Well, I said to her, "Why did you put it on?" And she said, "It never occurred to me not to. I was looking at it on the table, and I just picked it up, and it just seemed, you know, the natural thing." I mean, other people, I know that these are museum pieces, really. These artifacts are, some of them are handleable, and it's kind of nice to be able to give a talk and for people to come and be able to be tactile with things as long as they're careful, sort of thing. But no one's ever put the damn thing on before. I think Doreen would have found that hilarious, and I think if she'd been watching, and she probably was, wherever she is, she was probably watching the scene, and she probably thought, "Yeah, that'll make him laugh when he sees that someone's put the damn thing on. Let's see what that means." I mean, I think there's a lot of over reverence in the way that human beings have come to practice their religion. This is just a personal opinion. This is just my thoughts. But you know, one of the central tenets of modern day witchcraft is that, and it comes probably comes from medieval Italian witchcraft and notions of the goddess and things about Diana and her daughter and these sort of myths. But Diana sort of said, "You're my hidden children. You should enjoy yourselves. You should be happy. You should strive to find your own joy and bliss inside you." And mirth and reverence are equal partners in that. So we find a great deal of humour, and I find that there are other pagan religions that are probably a bit closer to their ancient roots. So again, I refer to my Indian friend. We used to laugh a lot, and I miss that. And we would be doing some fairly hefty ceremony, but there was always room for a joke or laughter, and laughter is a very powerful human emotion. It's very, very powerful. So mirth and reverence are two. I don't know. I've diversified my own conversation. I shall disappear in a magic circle. I
told you this was a conversational kind of show, didn't I?
You did, and you've encouraged me, and you've led me down the path of a spiraling diversification.
Yeah, well, definitely a show with a difference. Ashley, during the Second World War, Doreen went to work for the Foreign Office in the Bletchley Park. Is this correct? As a translator.
We believe so. Doreen always, most of the people who we've had a chance to interview knew her later in life. She was always extremely evasive about what she did. She would brush things off by saying she worked for the government. And we'd always had this suspicion that she'd done something a little bit secretive during the war. She'd been married twice, first to a Greek sailor and second to a refugee from the Spanish Civil War. And the Greek sailor, he died very shortly afterwards. So she'd also lived in Southampton. And there's this bizarre episode where she moved to Cardiff as well. But she certainly did work for the government. And then we dug up some...
That was another connection, actually.
All right.
South Wales. That's where I am now. I'm in South Wales.
You'd have to ask her biographer, Philip Heselton, who is also the world's foremost expert on Gerald Gardner, for the exact details. But I'm sure Philip would tell the story better than me. But there's this really strange incident where her parents were unable to contact her, and she was very secretive about things for quite some time. But we did Philip dug up some evidence from a source that at Bletchley Park itself that seems to suggest that she was working there, and we actually got down to which hut she was in and what she was doing, and she was translating. She was working, we believe, in the department that was part of the turning of enemy agents and the translation and the basic department of misinformation, I suppose, which kind of in a witchcraft way makes sense. Doreen wasn't, of course, a practicing witch at that point in her life. She may have well been very interested in the occult and may have known a lot about it, but she knew a lot about ciphers and codes and languages and things, and it kind of makes sense that that's what she was doing. But she spent a couple of years doing some unusual jobs, popping up in unusual places, and mostly to do with shipping ports and places like that, where it seems to indicate that she was perhaps working for the government in some way, and she certainly had her contacts in Whitehall, which she kept up at quite some time later. There was definitely a secret side to Doreen's life. The Bletchley evidence, really, we're still trying to really verify that properly or cross verify it. But we've certainly seen records that show her name on a register and a roll at Bletchley that indicate that's what she was doing. And I've had a few people who knew Doreen who said that similar things. They've said, I'm sure she was doing something quite secret and quite important during the war. But of course, let's remember that Bletchley Park wasn't, there was thousands of people. I think there was 13,000 employees at one stage. So it was quite a big operation. And she wasn't, I don't think anyone's crazy enough to think that, she was secretly cracked the Enigma code or any of the other things. But she certainly played her part, and she certainly kept bloody quiet about it afterwards.
Yeah. And even after moving to South Wales, she had work down here, which they thought was actually cover jobs for the intelligence.
Well, I mean, there's another curious incident that Philip dug up later in her life in the 60s, where she'd obviously, we're not really sure too much about how it came about that she got involved, but I've certainly have a copy in the. She didn't, as you can imagine, from somebody's legacy. There's a lot of letters in there that people wrote to Doreen, but obviously the letters she wrote to other people and sent them obviously aren't part of the legacy. So it'd be quite interesting to see them the other way. But occasionally she would keep a copy of a letter she sent. And my guess is that she did so when she thought it was important. So we have a copy of the letter that she sent resigning from the National Front, which is quite a bizarre thing for somebody like Doreen, who was a great feminist, a free thinker, and probably a bit of an old hippie, to be absolutely fair.
Yeah.
It seemed a bizarre thing that she'd become a member of the National Front, and it does cause you to speculate. Was she doing something undercover there? She was very investigative. Her notebooks, other people have called them her diaries, but really they are just daily notebooks. There's about 130 of them that span a good 30 years of her life, and some of them contain her shopping list, and some of them contain her Christmas card list, which is all very useful material for historians. Other bits of craft information, occult research, and so on. But she was very systematic in the way that she investigated things, and she's the one that proved the existence of a person that Gerald Gardner named as his initiator into the craft, who nobody else could find, and Doreen did the research that proved that this Dorothy Clutterbuck existed. So she approached things in that kind of investigative way, and it does make you wonder: did she do the same thing on a professional basis? And there's lots of little tantalizing snippets that indicate she probably did. So my suspicion
I think she did.
Yeah, I do. That's my gut feel. Although, the evidence is really, as Philip Heselton, the historian, would say, he intended to write a biography. We commissioned him on behalf of the foundation to write Doreen's biography, having written several biographies of Gerald Gardner. And he said, I'm going to write something that's a start that will encourage other researchers going forward to uncover more information later. He said, please, please, please don't publicize it as being the definitive biography, because it'll be far from definitive. It'll be just a start, a step on the way. So he's uncovered all this stuff, but really, it's going to take probably more people to come and do further research to really nail it down. So at the moment, I'm a bit loath to say definitely and definitively Doreen was at Bletchley Park, but the evidence that we've seen certainly is pretty categoric that she was, and it does fit with everything else she did. And she certainly had a secretive side beyond her interest in the occult and magic.
Yeah. I think she's an amazing lady, to tell you the truth. I really do.
Yeah, you've really got a feel for her, Irene, haven't you, in researching this program out?
Yeah. Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that connected with me, especially the South Wales, and then when I started looking at what the cover jobs or whatever she might be doing down here and things like that, and then even Hawley, where she moved to once, I used to go there shopping.
Well, people, she was quite reasonably well known in Brighton. People would see her on the street or in the tea shops and things and what have you. I mean, she really was one of those people who became a much bigger celebrity than she wanted to believe she was. And and she was very, what's the word? She was very self-deprecating about her fame and her celebrityhood. She's one of those people to whom I think it was far more important that she was able to do something useful with it than to swan around being famous. And I'm afraid all fields. I'm sure you have it in the paranormal scene, that there are people who are very famous and well known and obviously rather revel in that and enjoy it. And then there are others who are very well respected because they just get on with helping other people to find their way to do things. And I think Doreen was definitely a natural at that. Yeah. But she had I'm not going to call it shifty, but she had a shaded side to her nature and to her life. And some of the things she got involved with. I mean, you were saying about the jobs. What happened was she was married to a foreign national, Casimiro Valiente, and as a result of that, and as a result of her first marriage to Ioannis Vlachopoulos, the Greek sailor, during the war she had to sign in at a police station every few months to sort of describe her whereabouts, as all foreign or people who were connected to foreigners were expected to do. And that's how we've gained this evidence of her popping up with strange jobs that look like they're not. I think she was working in a shop on the docks, and she wasn't really a shop girl. It was kind of an unusual thing for her to do. And we started to speculate between us. Was she really serving in a cake shop or whatever it was, or was she undercover keeping an eye on movements and things that were going on? I don't know. It was a very
could well be. It works that way.
I mean, the war was a very strange time. There's a BBC radio interview with Doreen where she talks about the war, and she talks not about herself, but she talks about the way that people were generally. And those who lived through the war it must have been a very strange time to be. People were very suspicious of each other and everything around them, and frightened as well. I think there was this huge sort of psychic growth of fear as to what might happen. And of course, there are the famous in witchcraft circles stories of Gerald and his coven in the New Forest working magic and working the art to keep the invasion from happening, to keep the land invasion. Can't cross the sea, you can't cross the sea. The great ritual that took place, and Gerald, of course, hammed that story up quite a bit.
Yeah, witchcraft and psychics played a big part in the war. I know that.
Oh no, there's no question. I mean, Gerald's partner in the museum initially, with a man called Cecil Williamson, with whom he fell out eventually. They didn't like each other in the end, but Cecil had connections in Whitehall, and it's not an unknown thing at all that Hitler's and certainly other members of Hitler's inner group were terribly interested in the occult. But of course, if you're going to wage a war on all fronts in the way that the Second World War was carried out, not that I'm an expert historian on the subject, but it makes sense that getting into the psyche of the enemy population is an important thing, and propaganda is a big weapon, and I'm sure Mark will testify to that. Living in a wonderful country like America, where everybody's free to believe what they're told to believe.
You would think so up until recently.
Well, I was trying to make a slightly sardonic comment on that topic, but,
I got it.
What I'm saying is that propaganda, the way that you affect the group mind of a human civilization and a culture, our history is littered with bizarre. I mean, it seems utterly maddening to me. I cannot understand how the whole world, millions of people, got into fighting each other, and governed by just a few individuals who seem to wield so much sway over the masses. And I think Hitler's a very interesting study in that respect, and Doreen obviously thought so too. Funnily enough, when we looked at Doreen's book collection, she had there's about 2,000 books that she had, all stuffed in her little flat in Brighton, all behind different shelves and whatever. But we did smile wryly when we came across a copy of Mein Kampf in there, and it didn't surprise us that she read as widely as she did. She once said to John, slightly mysteriously, she once said, "Everything you need to know about everything you can find it all in these books in this room. If you look, everything, all the questions you want to ask me before I die, you'll find the answers in these books somewhere." So, there's all sorts of books. There's some first edition ancient manuscripts. There's books of magic that are extremely rare. It's a fantastic collection. But then in there are the trashy 60s paperbacks on witchcraft and the occult. And there's copies of David Icke's books in there. She was quite a fan of his books. I think they met each other as well a couple of times, Doreen and David Icke, because he lived on the Isle of Wight, I believe. I think he still does. So I know that she was always interested in anything that was a bit unusual or a bit kind of non-mainstream. I've managed to spiral the conversation into a strange, diverse thread again.
It's quite all right.
And she used to write herself, didn't she? She wrote for magazines, and plus she wrote her books. And she wrote a poem book and a short story book that wasn't published at that time.
John used to say to me, John Ballantyne was Doreen's last high priest, and he is the founder of the Doreen Valiente Foundation and the inheritor of her legacy. And he preserved and protected her legacy that she gave to him. She bequeathed him by donating it to the foundation, to a charitable trust that we formed, so that it can be protected forever and for all time. And John said to her once, "Is there anything you actually regret?" He knew her right at the end of her life, and he was there when she died. Actually, he was holding her hand as she passed away. And he said to me, I asked Doreen if there was something that she regretted, and she said, "I always thought I fancied having my poems published, but my publisher wasn't really interested in a book of poems." And John said he promised Doreen and he promised himself that he would publish her poems, and indeed we have done. And there's quite a lot. I think there's over 100 poems in the book called Charge of the Goddess. Because, of course, Doreen's contribution to modern-day witchcraft, as well as the public exposure of it and her public books, she rewrote a great deal of the inner material, the secret rituals of the craft that we practice. And some of the ritual litanies and liturgies and various bits of writing that are quite well known inside and outside the craft, and she wrote those, including a very famous piece called Charge of the Goddess, which is the title we gave to the poetry book when we edited it up. And some of these pieces of writing she's certainly a skilled and talented poet. So I don't think we had some poetry experts analyse her work, and she gave a talk to the Poetry Society as well. So she was really quite interested in poetry. I think she thought that was a medium that she was good at, and I think she perhaps felt that she wasn't as recognised for that as she would like to have been. So it pleased John a great deal to publish her poetry books. He actually said to me, that's another one to tick off the list of things I promised I'd do for Doreen that I've now been able to say I did. And so I think I hope she would have been pleased too with the way the poems turned out. $9.99 from our website. You can buy them now.
I was just going to ask. You read my mind. That's usually my job.
well, I'm a witch. We do that.
Yeah. I must be as well, because I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the only one in the room here.
You're the only one? Sorry?
I'm the only muggle in the room here.
Oh, wow. That's a terrible word. That's a terrible word. No, and I don't think you should say that either. If you were one of my trainees, I'd tick you off for that. I'd tick you off for that, Mark, because I believe that we're a planet of about 6.5 billion eccentrics who are all absolutely unique and amazing and incredible. And you shouldn't liken yourself to that. And normal, there's no such thing as normal. No one's normal.
Actually, I was just going to be facetious and say, actually, I'm American, so actually I'd be a nomad. I saw the new movie. No. It was good.
He's far from normal, Ashley. I can tell you.
Well, fair enough. We
mug,
were talking.
Yeah. I don't know about muggle, but mug, yeah.
Well, you perhaps don't know. There's a kind of in thing in modern pagan community of describing non-pagans as muggles, and I think it's.
I thought that word only came around with Harry Potter.
Yes, it did, and that's where it's nodded to. That's kind of the joke. But I find it a bit tasteless, to be frank with you. I mean, there are people like, oh dear. I know a number of people who are involved in the pagan community, myself included, who get ourselves involved in other things, carrying on the great work of making paganism seem like it's available to the mainstream, and it's not something to be frightened of or sinister, and to kind of knock out some of the myths. So I sit on the local board of the advisory council that advises our local education authority about religious education in schools. And I also sit on the local interfaith council on the committee of that. And those are areas where we're dealing with other people of other religions who are becoming more welcoming and more inviting to pagans and paganism, and accepting that it's a part of our society. So I think derogatory terms like muggle isn't really helping that cause, although there is a sort of backhanded snigger to the idea that we've been outcast as pagans all these centuries, and now we've kind of got our own back with a word of our own. But thanks to J.K. Rowling, that's, if nothing else, she's given us that word to use behind closed doors, I suppose.
Well, then there's the other term that she coined, which I was going to ask about anyway. You talk about a lot of people in the paranormal community or a lot of the other communities, and they pass themselves off as experts, or as having great abilities, and then in the end it turns out that they're, to use her term, squibs, where they really don't have anything at all. It's just more of they're building their own egos up and trying to present themselves as something they're not.
Well, Doreen, I think there's a Doreen quote on the subject, one of my favorite ones, and she said, you can always tell the actual ability of an occultist because it's inversely proportional to the ability that he tells everyone he's got.
Yeah.
And I think that might be true in a lot of other fields as well. The people who've got the loudest voices aren't always the ones with the most knowledge.
Don't we know that one, Irene?
I'm sure. I mean, I got involved a couple of years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I was invited to speak at a paranormal conference, and I wasn't at all sure. I knew nothing of what the paranormal community is like. But as I spent some time meeting the people involved, I came to realise that in many ways there's a lot of similarities between the pagan community and the paranormal community in terms of the way we think we're perceived by the outside world, and in terms of our recognition and things. And it made me smile, actually. I worked it into my talk that I gave at one of the paranormal conferences I was invited to speak at. And I thought it was really interesting to see that the only real difference is that because we as pagans have a faith, and it's therefore considered to, for whatever reason, arbitrarily to be a religion, then we are accorded legal protections, and there are acts of Parliament that prevent people from treating us unfairly, because you can't. Religious discrimination is a bad idea. And actually, it strikes me that people who operate in the paranormal world do exhibit all the traits of somebody who has a belief in something that they can't actually prove, a faith, if you like. And the only real difference is that, you know, it's much more fun and easy to ridicule people who believe in ghosts and who believe in spirits and things, and get away with it, because you haven't got the same protection that those of us who can use the R word of religion to hide behind, or to help as a shield and a defense. And I think it's a great shame, and it's kind of interesting that the people you come across in both communities are with the exception of the thing that they actually believe in, they exhibit pretty similar traits in terms of the way they go about experiencing and investigating their belief. And I think there's a great crossover as well, especially if you're looking at, you know, occult and magical subjects. You're getting into the same realms a lot. We use quite similar language. We talk about spirits and energies and things like that, don't we?
Well, here's
true, yeah.
There's a question for you in regards to the R word. Would you really consider this type of Wiccan paganistic practices? I don't know. Would you consider it a religion per se, in having a belief or a faith in something that can't be proven? Or is it more of a practice, way of life, because it is using and directly working with energies and practices that one seems to be about, you know, unsupported belief, and the other one is a practice that seems to produce results. So it almost doesn't seem like a religion per se to me.
Well, I think it's both, and it depends who you ask. I think it's an amalgamation of both. There's different ideas of what witchcraft is. If you asked 100 witches what witchcraft is, you get 200 answers, and the same is true of paganism. I believe that modern-day witchcraft, and certainly Wicca and the craft of the wise as I practice it, is a religion. It's a system of personal spiritual development, and a mystery tradition that encourages the development of one's own spirituality. And I was thinking about this a long time ago, and I came to the conclusion that the best way to use the language is just to say that, for me, spirituality is what goes on in a non-physical way in your development, whereas religion is the outward expression of that. But what it's to do with is to do with your belief and faith in the reality of something like that we'll call the divine, shall we? Let's call it. I don't want to call it God or goddess or whatever. Let's call it the divine. If you believe that there is some kind of, I don't want to use the word superior or higher because they're bad words. There is something that's non-physical, that has a broader and deeper reality than individual human beings. Let's just say that. If you want to consider your relationship with that, with the divine, then you're dealing with the world of spirituality, and you're dealing with the world of religion, because religion involves, I don't know how you define religion, but it involves that outward physical expression, that ritualistic expression of making that connection with the divine. So I think if you have a belief or a faith that involves what I'm defining as the divine, then I guess that makes you a religion. So I suppose it's then splitting hairs, and then you're playing with language as to try and determine the difference between believing in ghosts and spirits and believing in a divine power or a divine force. But maybe that's something for the listeners to have a think about. You have a go at defining what makes it a religion, whereas a paranormal investigator who believes in the existence of ghosts isn't following a religion. What's the difference really in practice? But to answer your question, Mark, to me, modern day witchcraft is a religion, because we do have a divine personification of a male or masculine universal force or energy, and a female one in balance and harmony. So we have a god and a goddess, and I hate the word worship. I don't like the word worship because that implies all kinds of demeaning, self-deprecating limitations on our spirituality. But we have a relationship with those beings or those personifications of this greater force, and for that reason it makes witchcraft for me a religion.
being that if you look at it from the religious standpoint, let's take a look at, with every religion, there is the positive spiritual sides, and there are the negative sides. There are the negative forces in Christianity, the demonic, Satanism, whatever. What about dark forces in relation to Wicca?
Well, I mean, the Wiccan view is much more guided by intent than it is anything else. And the example I would give is to say that, are you going to call a gun and a bullet evil? You can't do that, because you can use them for a good purpose. It's the use of it. And I think that religion, and I think energy and spiritual currents are guided by the intent behind them. Perhaps a gun's a bad example. Let's say a car. You could use a car to intentionally run somebody over, or you could rush them to hospital when they'd had an accident. It's not the car itself that's good or evil. It's not the vehicle. It's not the religion. It's the intent behind it. And, unquestionably, there are good and bad people in all sectors of our society. And in the religious community, there are good and bad in religious leaders of all types. And I'm quite sure that as modern paganism, which is a significant but small fraction of the proportionately, I'm sure that we're going to have our share of idiots, twits, morons, criminals, and generally bad people. But you can't really judge a religion by that, in the same way that it would be grossly ridiculous to judge Catholicism by the small number of Catholic priests who've been convicted of heinous offences. You can't judge a whole group by a few individuals. So religion, the Wiccan worldview is that good and evil are not two opposing forces that are in some kind of mortal combat with each other throughout eternity, but that it's a more malleable and more flexible approach to what you're trying to do at any one time. It's no real secret of the craft that the principal guiding moral tenet is, "An it harm no one or none, do as you will," which means, to me, find out what it is that your true, most harmonious path to happiness in life is, and provided it doesn't interfere with anybody else's harmonious path to their happiness, then try and live by that really hard. And to me, that's a good moral code that doesn't need to bring the concepts of good and evil into it.
What about...
Wow, we've got deep, haven't we?
Yeah, well, and here's the other thing. I mean, even in Native American aspects of shamanism, there are the dark practitioners, the skinwalkers of South America, the southwestern native lore, the dark practitioners of this, and which is true of Wiccan too, has its the stain of people using it for ill intent and evil purposes. So, human beings being human beings, you have good and bad people, and they will tend to use the same tools but in different manners, as you earlier pointed out.
Yeah, exactly.
What about those people? We're going to lead into something specifically here, but is there practices where you could put inlay energies into solid objects? Let's say if someone has of negative intent, put something into an object that causes it to carry that negative energy?
I believe so, yes. And I've experienced that on numerous occasions, and good as well. But yes, that's true. And there are certainly people who can make use of their talents at guiding and directing forces and energies, the magical arts, if you like, or the art of magic, and to do things with harmful intent or negative intent, without a doubt. I've seemed to have developed a propensity for helping people who have got problems in their houses and homes, what they might call a haunting or whatever. 9 times out of 10, the cases I've taken on have turned out to be something more mundane than that. But I've certainly encountered objects that have got something that's not very good associated with them that tends to have a negative effect around them. So there's undoubtedly people out there who are putting to work their magical talents to do that. Certainly my practice of the craft and the way I've been taught is that if you can help somebody, you should always help somebody. It's a fairly simple moral code that kind of finds its way through most modern religions. So I would say that if somebody is practicing magical arts with a harmful or negative intent towards somebody else, or an intent to dominate or subdue somebody, or manipulate the other person's will, then they're not a practitioner of Wicca, because they're, in the same way that a Christian would say they're not a Christian. They're not behaving in a Christian way. They're not behaving in a Wiccan way. But, it would be trite to suggest that everybody in the world who describes themselves as Wiccan is a wholesome, wonderful, nice person who runs around in nature helping the earth energies all the while, because, frankly, as you say, human nature is that some people are, some people are not very nice. And they find their way into all bits of society, don't they?
Well, we're going to open that up for you, Irene, now. Why don't you come in with your story?
You can do it.
Why do you leave it to me? You're the one who suggested it.
Okay, Ashley. I don't know where to start. That's why, Mark.
Well, we led into this story because Irene has something in her possession. It came into her possession many years ago. A certain ring. And
50 years ago.
Why don't you tell the brief story on that one, Irene? I'm going to find the picture to show Ashley.
Okay. This ring was brought over from Italy.
Ah, right, okay.
The story from the south coast of Italy, Amalfi, actually. And not far from... oh, Christ almighty, I've forgotten the bloody name of... Pompeii. Okay, not very far from Pompeii. It's very old. I think it goes back to the Middle Ages. It's handmade. It's obvious that it's handmade.
Right.
It came into my possession. It was brought over from Italy, and apparently the story that goes behind it was that an old hermit in the village up in the mountains wore it continuously all his life.
Okay.
When he died, the person that brought it over to the United Kingdom found it in the house that the hermit used to live in.
Okay.
Okay, hanging. It was the only thing in the house. There was nothing else in the house. The house had been cleared out, but the ring was hanging on a nail banged into the wall in the kitchen. So he took the ring and he brought it to the United Kingdom. When he was in the United Kingdom with the ring, nothing but bad things happened to him. He became ill. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him and one thing or another. So being Catholic, he went to a churchyard and he buried it in the churchyard. Okay?
Okay.
But I got to hear about the story. And, of course, me being me, wanted to see the ring. So we went along there one evening with spades and one thing or another to dig this ring up. Now, the whole churchyard had been mown. Now, the ring had lay in the churchyard all through the spring, through the summer, the winter, and into the next year. Okay? Right. So it gone through all the elements. The whole churchyard had been mown. All the grass in the churchyard was short, except for one tuft of grass. And he walked over to it and he said, "It's there." So I pulled at this tuft of grass. Now, and that grass was grown. It was in the ground. Really could not pull this tuft of grass out of the ground. So we dug it up. And I took the ring out of the ground, and the ring wasn't even covered in dirt. It was shiny. It wasn't wrapped in anything. There was no muck on it. It was perfect. It was just as if the ring had been placed in there. And if it hadn't been for that tuft of grass, that big tuft of grass, which was about nearly a foot high, if it hadn't been for that, I would never have believed that ring had been in the ground that long. Okay? So the ring then, he said to me, "You can have it." So it came into my possession. So I took it in Croydon. There was an old jewellery shop which belonged to I think it may have been Hungarian or Polish or somebody. He was obviously a refugee from the war. And I took it into there, and he took one look at it and told me to get out of the shop.
Right.
Don't bring that into my shop. So after a bit of persuasion and haggling with him, he eventually took the ring and he looked at it. He said, "The eyes are garnets, He said it's solid silver, it's handmade, and he said it's very, very old. Now get it out of my shop. He said, you're the keeper of the ring, now get it out of my shop. And I've had it ever since, but I keep it in a cupboard.
Have you suffered any ill effects and attributable to the ring, do you think?
No ill effects that I know of. I feel an energy coming from the ring, and occasionally if I put it on, I lose my temper.
Right.
But that's about it.
Well, there are times
and it goes
also
back in the cupboard.
There's also times you feel it calling to you unexpectedly.
Oh, yeah. It wants me to get it out of the cupboard every now and then, but I ignore it.
Yeah, that's. It certainly sounds like you. There's an object there that's got a history that's had some energy poured into it with an intent for something. Go on.
I sent a photograph of it to the British Museum because we'd done some research, me and Mark, and we found out that the god Pan was worshipped quite a lot in that area, especially in Pompeii. They'd unearthed a statue of Pan.
Okay.
So we thought, well, maybe it could be Pan, not so bad. Maybe it's Pan. So we sent it to the British Museum, this photograph to the British Museum, didn't we, Mark? And got an email back from them saying it was very, very old. They could tell it was very old. They couldn't say exactly how old, but it was going into hundreds of years. And there was no way they thought it was Pan.
Okay.
They thought it was a demon.
Italy, like many of the other countries around, particularly the Mediterranean countries and Northern Europe, it's got a long history of underground hidden pagan practices. Now, I know a number of people
the Stragers.
The Stragari, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I know some people who are interested in that. A lot of that is very hereditary. A lot of the ways in which some of these gifts and some of these old ideas and traditions were passed in, particularly in Italy, is hereditary.
Yeah.
And in fact, modern day witchcraft owes quite a lot to the research or the dubious research, as you might say, of a gentleman called, an American gentleman called Leland, called Charles Godfrey Leland, who wrote a book called The Gospel of the Witches, where he purported to have got hold of documents that told of mysteries involving the goddess coming to earth and these sorts of ancient things that he said were handed down amongst the Italian witch families. And there's also a long history of other stuff going on there that gets, you've got Etruscans and Romans and all sorts of strange cultures that intermingle. But the thing that happens a lot, and it happens in Britain too, is that you have localized deities and gods and goddesses who are then subsequently taken over by conquering, invading, or even evolving cultures. So you have to kind of dig right back to look at where these god names come from and where the origins of them are and what it was made. So, you had this sort of thought that this ring depicts Pan.
Well, we hoped it did. We hoped it
did. I suppose to pose an awkward rhetorical question, because I'm a witch and that's my job, what's the difference between a god and a demon then?
Well, I guess
not a lot.
Again, it's interpretation or perception depending on the point of view of people, whether in a religion or because gods or demons, well, depending on if they do you harm or do you good. But then you could make the argument, if you look at the God in the Old Testament, all the people he killed, banished people for not doing much of anything, he got ticked off quite easily. Yeah, he was a raging,
vengeful god.
Yeah, I have no problem with saying he was a raging asshole, and you know what? He did some things that would be considered quite evil. But hey, he's God, so he has to be good. And then Satan, the Satan character, really, I love Milton's interpretation of it. Is just coming out and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you know what? Don't exactly agree with you over here. Well, then that means you're evil." It's all interpretation.
Yeah, You've got adversaries, and you've got other cultures where there's a sort of counterpart to the good and beneficent God, and you have all of these kind of interesting arguments as to what they are. That's kind of what I was stirring up, and you've helped to diversify the conversation again away from Irene's ring. But that if you have a particular feeling about an object, then that gut feeling is probably it's probably worth investigating. And if somebody else has a history with that artifact of finding it gives off, or they detect from it an energy that is in some way negative, then I guess under that language that you're using, you would say it might be depicting a demon rather than a god. But you're right to say that history and mythology of all cultures talks about gods doing good and bad things. I'm using the word good and bad deliberately there because they're kind of evasive bits of language in themselves. So that's right. And of course the beneficent, all-loving, all-compassionate Christian God, according to the Old Testament, committed some pretty horrific atrocities on people who, by all the accounts that we read, probably didn't deserve it. There's a lot of innocent people got mashed and caught up just because some king somewhere did something wrong and all the rest of it. I mean, his mythology is full of these sort of ideas. The question is, from my perspective, with regard to the ring, is what's the intent? What was it made for, and who put that negativity into it, and why? And it's probably less important than determining what it's a depiction of. Although, if you're trying to figure out who the character is it Pan, is it a demon, is it something else, that might provide a clue in the story as to why somebody would imbue that artifact with some sort of negative energy. But that in itself, knowing whether it's Pan or not, I suppose you could take a Pan ring or even a Christian ring and put negative energy into it. I don't see any reason why the actual depiction necessarily is good or bad or harmful or not in itself. So and there's no doubt that there are cursed objects in the world, or objects that, let's use the word cursed, or objects that have a negative energy associated with them.
Yeah, what I can make out from it is from the hermit anyway. He wasn't an evil man. He just kept himself to himself, and he always wore the ring, which maybe was handed down to him over generations of his family having it or something. I don't know. But
maybe he knew it wasn't. Maybe he knew himself that it had negative connotations, and he knew how to keep them at bay, put it in the cupboard like you did. Maybe he felt it was his duty to do that. Did you say it was found hanging on a nail in his house after he died? Is that what you said?
Yeah, someone hung it on a nail.
Yeah,
metal nail. Which I thought to myself, yeah,
somebody left it behind or left it for whatever reason, and it wasn't just thrown away or carefully discarded.
Or buried with him or anything.
No, seems kind of there's obviously a good story there.
Yeah,
sounds like a wonderful plot for a film.
Yeah, I think the ring needed to go to somebody else. I don't know, something about the ring. It just tells me that it wasn't the end for the ring. It had to be passed on. But where it had to be passed on to, I don't know.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them.
I was waiting for Mark to come in with the golden
Did you
voice.
see the picture of it, Ashley?
I didn't. No, unfortunately, I didn't.
They're in messaging now underneath.
Oh, is it? I'll have a little look. I'll have a look while we're talking, and if I can get back into my phone. Yeah, that's. I don't know whether I can add anything to the story. It's just. It's just, I think the story is as interesting as the artifact, and I know some people in the paranormal world who collect artifacts. There's a guy who describes himself as a demonologist. His name is Jason Love, and he's a Scotsman. And the boot of his car on Paranormal Conference Day is an interesting place because he has all these strange plastic boxes with haunted dolls in them. It's most unnerving. I wouldn't like to be the policeman that stopped him late at night. And let's have a look in the back of it. It made me jump when he lifted the boot up. But these sort of things, I mean, I certainly, in magical terms, it's perfectly possible to imbue an object with energy, I suppose you could say. So it sounds pretty clear that what you've got... Oh, there he is. Ah. Yeah, I can see why you would think Pan. It looks a bit leonine to me as well. It looks almost lion-like.
But the curved ram horns on the sides are very distinct. So it's...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, now I've looked at it in close-up, you're right. They're definitely curled horns. I mean, okay, we could get into all kinds of talk about the origins of horned gods and the Roman Pan and various other hundreds of them, and how that was morphed into this idea of a Christian devil about 300 AD or so, when these concepts really started to emerge, and how these ancient masculine godlike figures that bore the traits of, let's have a look, anthropomorphic maleness, so horns and sticking out bits. Let's just leave it at that for now. You know, that they were then morphed into something that has a negative connotation that's had such an impact on centuries of people's thinking, you know.
Yeah, I thought they maybe curled his horns in because if they were sticking out, they'd be going to catching on your clothes all the time, wouldn't they?
It may be. I mean, it may be that the object was made for a different purpose to what it was then put to. You know, you can imbue more or less any object.
It's very heavy. Very heavy ring. Very thick as well.
It's got quite character, hasn't it?
I don't know whether Mark can show you the inside of the ring, but it's...
That hook nose as well, it looks kind of...
yeah, it's got very hook nose.
It certainly doesn't make me... My first sort of gut emotional reaction to it isn't depiction of a horned god. It's something scary, isn't it? It's got some sort of something not quite, not totally wholesome about it, isn't it?
No, with the sharp angles of the chin, protruding chin, the nose, even the what looks like rubies or another type of red.
Have you got a side profile?
What?
Side profile.
Yeah, I will show that too. And remember, this is radio.
It makes me smile because, you know, I mean, again, we're doing the human thing, aren't we? If you hadn't told me the story before I saw the picture and just showed me that and said, "Oh, there's Pan," I'd have thought, "Oh yeah, my familiar character, the horned god, and all the rest of it." But I'd still think there's something a bit lopsided about that. There's something not there. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? That's how we do things as humans. You know, if you had that story the way you described it, then seeing the ring, if you'd shown me the ring first, it would have been maybe I'd have had a different reaction to it. Maybe if you showed that to, I certainly can imagine that there are plenty of you know, other witches and pagans that if you showed them that, they'd just instantly go, "Oh, the horned god, yeah, great, I wish I had one of those."
Again, it's all a matter of perspective, who you show it to and their perceptions of it.
Well, again, you know, it's tapping into the human psyche, and we're dealing with what people like Jung and other thinkers in those fields would talk about, archetypes and stereotypes, wouldn't we? I mean,
right.
And for exactly the same reason, there's a whole plethora of horror films that feature haunted dolls. I've just mentioned that. It just made me think, you know, there's something kind of creepy about a sort of Victorian doll that sort of sits on the shelf and looks at you every day. There's my girlfriend Sarah's got a doll that was handed down in her family, and she keeps it in the loft. She didn't at her parents' house. She didn't like it. She said it creeped her out as a child, and it creeps her out even more as an adult.
Well, there's that.
You know, is that the doll itself, or is that just the way you're looking at things, your interpretation of them?
And I'd rather face the ring than a doll.
Yeah, well then, Irene, I should take you to that island of dolls outside of Mexico City. See how you do with that.
Whew. Yeah. You know, I mean, again, it's cultural, isn't it? It's to do with the time and the place, you know, and now everything builds up a psychic imprint on you and on people and on human beings. You know, there's a plethora of horror films that have an effect on making you think these things. You know, I should imagine, I know my mum used to say when I was growing up, she used to say about watching films, she'd say, "Oh, you've got to be 18, you have to be old enough before you can watch Psycho," or something like that. And she said, when we saw Psycho in the 1960s, there was no film like it. There was nothing. She said, my experience in life had been nothing like that, nothing so horrific. She said, I couldn't take a shower after that. And so suddenly, you know, you developed a sort of an emotional response to shower curtains just because you've seen something horrific in a movie and so on. And I think that's how humans are influenced by their culture, and our ancestors were influenced too. So, you know, I'm quite sure that people living in ancient Pompeii, I don't know how old this ring is, if it's very old, but they'd have been influenced by the cultural
but this is it.
Things around them at the time, wouldn't they?
Yeah, the guess is that it goes back to medieval times, but it could be older. It could be older.
Okay.
Who knows?
I mean, so, you know, I mean, no. Okay.
It's solid silver.
Yeah, I mean, by that time, there's no question that a face with a hook nose and a pointy chin and any sort of horns is reminiscent of of something sort of demonic or satanic, isn't it?
Especially with the red eyes as well.
However, an earlier culture or an earlier civilization would have looked upon a god like Pan as being relatively beneficent. I think the point is that the archetypes, the actual reality behind it, the force behind these things is a bit independent of our interpretation of it. It's how we look at things, and what it makes us feel is just as important as the thing itself. And if you want to get into that.
The strange thing about it is sometimes I feel really close to the ring, and I want to be with the ring, and then other times it's the total opposite. But when I wear the ring, then my emotions change and I become quite nasty, bitchy, and angry all of a sudden.
Wow.
And as soon as I take the ring off, I'm okay again. So he spends most of his time in the cupboard in the kitchen now. But
I'm intrigued now,
30 or 40 years, he lived in an attic.
Right. Okay. I was intrigued to wonder why if that's the response it has on you when you put the ring on, is why you would go and get it out of the cupboard and put it on. Why you would want to be that way.
Yes, but it's like Mark says, it kind of calls sometimes.
Compulsion.
Yeah. Yeah. And other times I can go into that cupboard, I can see the bag there with the ring in it, inside the bag, and I just shove it out the way. But the only reason it's in the kitchen cupboard now is because we've been recently trying to find out more about it. If it goes back up in the loft, I'll lose it up there with all the junk. So,
no, it's a great story, and there's obviously something to it. There's obviously something behind there, isn't there? And knowing that, you lucky in a way to know enough to know as much as you do know about its history. It's the sort of thing that you could find. To hark back to Doreen again, but her collection is full of bits and pieces like that, all of which must have a story, and we'd love to know what they are. And it's fascinating to dig into these things. We mounted an exhibition in Royal Pavilion Museums in Brighton last year it was supposed to be an exhibition of Doreen's artifacts, but it turned into a description of what paganism is, from cave paintings right the way through to modern day druids and heathens and all sorts of other practices. And there was several artifacts that I used to illustrate certain things. One of them was a piece of carved bone that I used to illustrate early primitive religions. Why Doreen had it, I don't know. Had no idea. Couldn't really see what the point of it was or the purpose of it in Doreen's collection. It didn't particularly and specifically relate to modern day witchcraft practices. But during the course of the exhibition, somebody, they rang me up from the museum and they said, "We've got a visitor here who says he gave that to Doreen. He made it. He was the one who made it, and he gave it to her." And I thought, great, we've got another story of something else, another artifact in the collection that's now got a story to it. And from an historian's point of view, it's fascinating that everything carries that story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hope you find out more about the ring, but I hope it doesn't bring you any ill luck. And
I've never had any real bad, touch wood. I've not really had any real bad luck, but I've also not had that brilliant good luck either. So
no, but then its previous owner obviously did, and to cause him to want to go and bury it in a churchyard.
Yeah, it frightened him. It literally frightened him. So that's just it. It's
also human nature, isn't it? Some of us are. You obviously strike me from what little I know of you as somebody who's more fascinated than frightened by anything that's got a sort of slight dark twist to it like that.
Yeah, but then again, this could be his belief system. He became ill, and then after he got rid of the ring, he got well again. So he blames it on the ring.
Oh, well, that's an interesting human reaction to stuff, isn't it? That we do that all the time. I'm perfect. I've had plenty of interesting conversations and seminars and things I've attended where we've had people of faith and people of no faith. And, I'm perfectly prepared to believe that atheists are correct, and that once this little sack of meat that I ride around on finally meets its demise, then it'll all go black and there'll be no consciousness left. I'm perfectly open to the idea that might happen. It's all about what you believe at any particular moment in time. I practice these. I think anybody of religion must have, at some point during their practice, kind of lifted out of the consciousness of it and looked at themselves and thought, this looks ridiculous. What am I doing running around in a white robe in the middle of the night, or, standing in this room making a sign of a cross and singing these hymns and imagining that I'm contacting some giant invisible friend in the sky? Depending on the language you use, then I think the practice of religion externally can be faintly ridiculous, whichever religion you take. And, there can't possibly be a Siberian shaman or a native Indian medicine man who hasn't looked up at some point and thought, what the hell am I doing this for? It's just crazy. Yeah. I think there's something wrong with you if there's something not quite right there if you haven't had that thought. And I'm perfectly happy to accept that some of the things I believe in are going to sound completely wacky and ridiculous to somebody else. And I think that the point is that we live in a society and a culture where we should be more tolerant of each other's ideas. The question shouldn't be, is your idea silly? It should be, does it affect me if you want to have a silly idea? And no, it doesn't. So fine, great, go with it. That's good. It's fine. So I don't know how we got to me making these great philosophical statements, but I seem to have spiraled the conversation into another weird area again, haven't I? I better let Mark ask another question.
No, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Well, we got about 5 minutes left in the program. Let me just ask, with your journey in Wicca and paganism, what do you feel like your goal is with it? Do you have any particular goal that's being pushing you in this direction, or are you just practicing it and living the dream?
Well, it's a big goal. Happiness is a big goal. Truth, love, understanding, knowledge, happiness, kindness, all those, they're all things that I think I'd like to aspire to. I'm having a bit of a tough time of that at the minute, and I'm finding that a bit difficult at the moment. We go through these waves. I have a friend who says, she talks about the way that your spirit inhabits your body when you're incarnated and how you go through life. And she rather comically describes life in modern society as a ride on the meat sack roller coaster. Just remember you're a spirit having a journey inside a body of flesh. She calls it the meat sack roller coaster. She'll ring me up and she'll say, how's the meat sack roller coaster today? Are you on an up or a down? It goes in waves. And these kind of sort of slightly faintly ridiculous comic philosophies have been something that I've gone through life with all along. But I'm thirsty for knowledge. I'd like to know. I'd like to find out what the truth is. I'd like to get behind the reality of things. And I want to try and be good and kind to people around me and see if I can help other people on their journey, because I've found a great deal of fulfillment and a great deal of things to aspire to in the other people I've met, and particularly within my journey in the craft. I've met some people who I've looked at and I've thought, it's a terrible thing to say, I wish I could be like you, or I hope somebody feels the way that I do about you. I hope somebody looks at me and feels that way one day. I hope I can help someone as much as you've helped me. But really, the fundamental quest of the human journey, and for me personally too, is find happiness, find some joy, seek out your bliss.
I think that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Because happiness, to me anyway, comes as something that makes me harmonious with those around me. I'm at my happiest when other people around me are also happy because of my presence or as a result of it, or at least that I'm not doing any harm. And there's nothing that hurts me more than feeling that I've harmed or hurt someone around me. So, and in that respect, so when I say simplistically, my quest is to be happy, it's because what makes me happy is other people around me being happy and harmonious. And, I think if we spread a little bit of that, the other sort of crazy thing is I think everyone thinks that. Yeah. I can't imagine that there are that many human beings who walk around the face of the earth waking up in the morning and thinking, I'm going to do something really mean and vicious today, and it'll give me even the people we consider to be bad people, I don't think they wake up in the morning and thinking, oh, it'll bring me a great deal of pleasure to do something hurtful today. I don't think anyone really thinks that. And that's why I can't quite understand how human civilization has gone the way it's gone, because there's so much hurt and harm whizzing round, and yet I can't find the individuals who are doing it. I'm pretty sure even Mark over there with all the current political climate, I'm pretty sure that a certain person who looks like he's got a dead fox on his head. I don't think he wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to be a big asshole today. I'm sure he doesn't.
No. I don't know.
I don't know. Right. Maybe I've used an extreme example there. Maybe I've gone too far.
I think sometimes he revels in it, but that's just me.
Well, maybe so. Maybe he can't help himself. But I'm quite sure he doesn't think. I'm pretty sure he doesn't think of himself as an evil or bad person, or an asshole. He can't do.
No. But then
I'm a kind of guy who can't imagine that other human beings don't. I can't. I find it beyond my concept of that the idea that people enjoy being assholes. I mean, I'd be mortified and horrified if someone thought of me as an asshole.
Yeah,
they probably are. Somebody probably does somewhere in the world.
But then there are those sociopaths, and that's the trick of it, is the people who are mentally ill and sociopaths who are. And, of course, Irene and I have had our fair share of those, haven't we? But we can't get into too much of that because we have come to the end of the show.
Oh, no.
Yes, it's over
let's
with.
leave it on a note of happiness then, instead of let's just remember we're a planet full of 6 billion eccentrics all making a happy journey through a meat sack roller coaster lifetime, and hopefully we can spread a little bit of harmony amongst ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So where, Ashley, can people buy Doreen's book?
www.doreenvaliente.org.
Okay, that's the foundation, yes?
That's the foundation's website, and we have a web shop on there that sells the books that we published, and of course we're a charity, so every penny that we can drag in is spent towards protecting, preserving, and conserving those objects, and helping us to get the information out there and to tell the truth about Doreen's life, and to help people to understand better what modern day witchcraft is all about, and why it's not something that you need to be frightened of, scared about, or treat with any ridicule or sinisterness. It's all about understanding. Knowledge is power, and if you know something about a subject, then you can perhaps understand it better and be more tolerant towards it.
Okay, now don't go away, Ashley. Will you?
I'm not going.
No, okay. Well, we are going to sign off. So everyone, thank you again for listening to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio. Tune in next week, same bat time, same bat channel, for another new guest. And have a great weekend.
Where can we be found, Mark?
You always throw that in at me last time when I'm trying to wrap up the freaking fracking show. iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, you name it, we're on it. So take a look for our archives. And, of course, we broadcast not only here on the PA UK Radio Network, but also we simulcast on TalkStream Live and TuneIn Radio. So, you happy? And I lost her. Okay.
I'm still questing for happiness.
Okay. All right. Well, Ashley, it was great having you on the program. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you, Ashley.
See y'all next week. Have a good one.